It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 118. We're recording this on the 24th of June, 2025. And we will be devoting most of the program to the conflict between Israel, US, and Iran. And joining me, as usual, is Jack the Insider. Sorry, no, that's me. Sorry. Hong Kong Jack. We're the Two Jacks, and it's easy to get confused. G'day, mate. How are you?
I'm good.
We believe there may be a ceasefire. Certainly Donald Trump has announced that there is one there, a 12-hour ceasefire, and then he believes there'll be a peace. The Iranians have responded that there will be no ceasefire unless the Israelis stop their attacks on Iran. So that would seem to be a fairly easy solution to make, Jack.
It would look like it, wouldn't it? Always unwise to get too far ahead of ourselves in these things, but that's how it looks like it's playing out.
It is changing, not by the day, but by the hour, as these major conflicts often do. Let's start with what happened last night, probably around about 2 o'clock Australian, 2 a.m. Australian Eastern Time. Iran fired 14 missiles at a US base in Qatar. They announced ahead of time that they were doing it, at least to the Qatari government, Jack.
And to the US government, I believe, as well.
Well, I presume from it, I mean, it may well be true what you say, but I presume from it that the Qataris found out and then advised the Americans. So certainly Donald Trump has thanked the Iranians for giving them advance notice of the missile strikes. You might have seen some of the footage from the Qatari skies, Jack. Missiles being taken out left, right and centre. Didn't see one land, but I presume some have, but there are no casualties, according to US reports again.
Yes, and the Qatari government has issued a strongly worded condemnation of it. This is Iran's former ally, I suppose, or erstwhile ally.
Yes.
But they've issued a strong condemnation of the whole thing. It certainly looks like that it was more of a performative thing than a genuine attempt to inflict damage.
Indeed. I haven't heard, but overnight, were there any strikes on central Israel, Tel Aviv?
No, I haven't heard that either. So
that would be interesting. Some of the things that I'm reading would indicate that the Iranians' ballistic missile stockpile is running very low. They, of course, used many of them on the attacks on Tel Aviv and central Israel more generally. It's looking at this. We really don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it is looking like, as you would expect, Israel and the United States outgun the Iranians considerably, to the point where the regime is sort of hanging by a thread. Now, of course, this comes in combination with attacks on the Iranian proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, the Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria and across Iraq, and I guess Hamas as well. And some of the other splinter groups. Should we be concerned about these characters, Jack, and what they might be getting up to?
Well, it looks like at the moment like a capitulation from Iran. And that has, I think, if that's true, then that will have a flow-on effect across the Middle East, because all of Iran's proxies will be more isolated. They rely on Iran for the money and for the missiles and rockets, etc. And without Iran, they're isolated, and that will apply to Hezbollah in Lebanon and to the Houthis in Yemen, to Iran's proxies in Iraq, but I also think it will apply to Hamas in Gaza, that I think Hamas will be well and truly isolated.
Yeah, it would seem that way. These are all very dangerous groups, of course, and we can't underscore what their capacity might be for chaos and damage going forward. But let's go back just a little bit, Jack. Israel launched attacks on Iran pretty much as we were speaking when we recorded on the 17th of June last week. Those bombing raids began. They were directed at strategic sites within Iran, particularly around their nuclear development program.
And also at the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard.
Were targeted assassinations and also so basically and around technical stuff around the nuclear development program, as well as members of the Revolutionary Guard and other senior military figures in Iran. And then, of course, Trump had told the world that he would wait 2 weeks, that he was hoping for a negotiated solution. But over the weekend, the B-2s were launched from Missouri, and with their bunker-busting bombs on board, slammed into 4 of the nuclear sites in Iran, Jack.
Yes. He did say within 2 weeks rather than in 2 weeks' time, but yes, that's pretty much what happened. The reports I've read from within Iran, and these are a bit sketchy because the Iranians don't allow a free and open internet, in the way that we're used to. But there's enough reporting to indicate that there was very little damage to civilians in Tehran, for instance, but that all of the facilities, all of the bases that are controlled by the Revolutionary Guard Council were attacked and badly damaged.
That we can't be sure, particularly about the underground facility. It's about 100k south of Tehran, southwest of Tehran. That was hit by the big bunker bomb, Jack. A couple, well, I think 4 or 5 were launched. We've seen the pinhole effects of these things. They are said to go through about 200 feet of soil and rock, and about 60 feet of concrete. So they're designed not to basically explode, in a nuclear laboratory, for example. But when they do, I believe the underground facility is some 270 feet below the ground, Jack. So just beyond the reach of these bombs. But they create such a seismic event when they detonate that they are likely to have caused significant damage that way. What we don't know, Jack, is, and we talked about this last week, the enriched uranium. There is some talk that it has been removed from these places.
Yes, we don't know where that is. One thing we have learned is from our good friends in Russia is that any talk that the Iranians were not developing a nuclear weapon is just not true. The Russian foreign minister, Dmitry Medvedev, outed them as saying, yes, of course they're developing a nuclear weapon, and we think that's a good idea. So that's one thing we've learned in the last 7 days.
Yes.
But as to how much damage has been done to their nuclear program, I mean, really only time's going to tell us the answer to that.
I would think their capacity for continually enriching more and more uranium would be completely debased. But there is a certain amount of material that may be of weapons grade. We talked about this last week, and the easy
or
way
able to be turned into weapons grade relatively.
You've got
quickly.
enough there for dirty bombs, Jack.
Yeah,
You've got enough stuff there for dirty bombs. So what we talked about last week a little bit was the enrichment process. And once you get to beyond 60%, 60% is basically at the grade to create nuclear energy. And then you need to get up to the high 80s and 90s to produce weapons-grade plutonium. It would seem that they were very close to that, if not at that point. But that doesn't necessarily give you a nuclear capacity. I should have clarified that last week. This is what the North Koreans have found, that they've been able to enrich uranium to weapons grade for some considerable period of time. What they haven't been able to do is miniaturise that and put it on a ballistic missile as a warhead. And that, I'm told by nuclear technicians, takes about 3 years. So let's first talk. I mean, the US intelligence services and security services were saying that Iran is not close to having a nuclear capacity. Tulsi Gabbard, the security or the national security advisor, was somewhat hung out to dry, Jack. She said that no, that was not the case, and then Trump said she was wrong. So I guess the question is, where did Trump get the information from? He may well have thought, well, of 3 years, 3 years is as close to it as we want to get. But where did he get his information from? Might it have been information shared by the Israelis? Might it have just been a bit of stuff on Fox News?
Only time will tell that as well. And someone will get access to those documents and the communications at some stage, well into the future.
Yeah. Overtly, at this point, it looks like it's been a pretty successful operation. I think the world, with the possible exception of Medvedev and Russia, does not want Iran to be nuclear armed. They have, of course, said that they are fixated on destroying the state of Israel. So I don't think there are too many sensible people around who would like to see the Iranians, under their current regime, have a nuclear capacity. The question is, how close were they? And then I guess we start talking about, this was the obsession yesterday, Jack, that the US strike was illegal, as was Israel's, because there were negotiations underway between the US and Iran and other nations to look at restraining Iran's nuclear capacity. So, what about the legalities of it, Jack?
Well, yes. What's it
called?
Paul Keating saying every parrot in a pet shop was on the net explaining why it was illegal, and Greg Barnes, reliably, he's always there with this stuff.
Yes. He put in a long note there.
He was saying that his argument is that, Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, members must refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the UN's purposes, and therefore was illegal, and there was no imminent threat from what the Iranians were doing. He may well be right, but it just doesn't matter. This is the misunderstanding people have of international law, in my view, is that laws only matter when they can be enforced, and if they can't be enforced, they're just a suggestion.
Well, that same law was used by the Russians to invade Ukraine. I mean, Lavrov got up the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, got up in the UN and said that Ukraine posed an existential threat to Russia, Jack, and that was the justification for their bombing raids of civilian centres.
Yep.
So I guess it's a lawyer's bun fight, really.
Except that it's a lawyer's bun fight without any effect.
without any effect. Yes, we are talking about sort of moral arguments, aren't we? Might the Chinese look the same way at Taiwan, Jack?
They might, and the reality is, if they think they can take Taiwan back and do so, whether they get a parking ticket for it's not going to make any difference.
I mean, this we can talk about international law until the cows come home, but the simple fact of the matter is might is right, isn't it?
Well, up to a point, that's correct. Yes, yeah.
Up to a very large point. I mean, we're not talking about sort of serious human rights abuses and those sorts of things, but basically, in any world order, might is right.
Well, all the people who rabbit on about the international rules-based order and trade rules and all that sort of stuff, for the last 60 or 70 years, that has relied on the United States to enforce it. Well, one thing that's interesting about this is, where were Iran's allies? Pundits were talking about Iran's allies, and they disappeared.
Well, Pakistan issued a nuclear threat check, didn't they, earlier last week, or late last week, I should say, that if nuclear weapons were used on Iran, they would respond with nuclear weapons strikes of their own. And as you say, fell silent thereafter. The Russians have condemned the attacks, straight-faced, after their abuses in Ukraine.
But also, the Russian president was reminding people just how many Russian people there are living in Israel.
That's right. There's over a million expat Russians in Israel, and I think
at least a million. Yeah,
at least a million, and that's in a country of 11 million people, Jack.
So he was saying that no, we wouldn't be doing anything to attack Israel.
And what about the rest of the Arab world, Jack? Haven't heard a peep out of Egypt?
No. Well, the rest of the Arab world, I would say, has been silently complicit in this activity, and perhaps even more complicit than that. None of this is possible without flying across Arab airspace, and that's not possible without their acquiescence, if not support.
Yes. So officially, we did hear condemnation from the Qataris prior to the missile strike on their territory, on their land. But we did hear some condemnatory stuff from the Saudis as well, but it was all pretty meek and mild, Jack. Well, strong language, but no action.
Yes, yeah, and really, it's fairly obvious that the Arab countries consider that anything that lessens Iran's powers is probably a good thing.
Are we still looking at a conflict between Shia and Sunni, Jack? Is that perhaps where we go after this?
Well,
the Middle
I don't
East
think it's a simple. I don't think it's
lapse into that kind of internecine conflict.
I don't think it's quite as simple as a Shia-Sunni conflict. There's no reason why a Shia Iran couldn't live peacefully in the midst of a largely but not exclusively Sunni Arab region. It's to do with the particular ideology of the Iranian regime as it's currently formatted. Right?
We'll go on to explain that, please.
That the current Iranian regime is an authoritarian theocracy, and it wants to impose its wishes on the rest of the region, and of course,
and more broadly into the Muslim world.
Yeah, and that's unacceptable to the Arab countries because they want to do things their own way. If an Iranian, perhaps if this is possible, a new Iranian regime wanted to live amicably and relatively peacefully in the region, then the rest of the Arab world, the largely Sunni Arab world, I don't think would have a problem with them.
Well, that's the next question. Can the regime survive? I'll just to give an outline, this might be a bit simplistic, but probably 80% of the Iranian people despise the regime.
but for varying
but
reasons.
The other 20% are the ones with the guns, and that's the problem with regime change. And I think what the Americans have done, and they've done this in the past, that they've been provoked to continue their attacks but haven't done so. And so far, that hasn't happened. So in response to the strikes, as modest as they were in Qatar, the Americans have not responded. And I think there's a sense there that you cannot bomb people into regime change. That their bombing has been strategic and designed to reduce Iran's military capabilities, certainly the nuclear in regard to the United States. And when we get to Israel, you may have seen some bombing raids on airports or military air places where their jets have been taken out. You have to look at their military, Jack, because of sanctions existing for so long. Their military, their Air Force, for example, they've still got US Tomcats going back to the 1970s. A very effective fighter jet back in the day, but they are completely outdated now, and they rely largely on, I guess, Russia for and they've got SUs and other strike aircraft. But it looks like their military capability has been stripped. If we go back to the Iran-Iraq War, 1979-80, Jack, I mean, basically the Iranians won that just won it to a standstill, shall we say, because they were able to just use human waves of troops. And again, in modern military conflict, those things don't work. So it looks like at this early stage, it looks like Iran is just completely, or the Iranian regime has been completely overwhelmed. If they go to peace talks, Jack, how do they save face?
Oh, well, I think that's what the bombing of the missiles into the US base in Qatar was about.
Well, I heard some rhetoric from the Iranians, from the Iranian regime about this, and it was a withering strike, and it was but none of those things. I mean, perhaps the Iranian citizenry look at this and go, well, these guys have completely lost the plot. What about the Pahlavi in New York, Jack, the son of the Shah? Is he likely to whisk himself over to Tehran and give the big salute to the Iranians, to the Iranian people?
I mentioned last week that Christiane Amanpour, the CNN broadcaster, thinks he's the person who's best placed. He's the person with the name recognition across the whole country that could bring the country together. I suppose that's possible. I mean, it may be the regime survives because, as you said, 80% of it seems probable that something like 80% of the population don't like the regime, but they don't like it for different reasons. There isn't a single group. Ralph Epstein was talking about this on Insiders, about how people, even the pundits, know so little about some of these countries they talk about. And he says, people don't even know whether it's a majority, whether the Persians are a majority or a minority ethnic group there. And I think at least one or two of the panel on the Insiders expressed that they didn't really know either. So
Tucker Carlson had a similar moment with Ted Cruz, Jack, the Texan senator. How many people? What's the population of Iran? Had no idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it matters whether it's 90 or 70 million. Once you get up to that number.
Ted, it could have been anywhere between 10 people and about and 200 million. He had no clue. And that is kind of lazy. And Tucker Carlson, I'm not a fan, but he did catch him out there. If you're going to support the invasion of a country, you should at least understand its demographics at a basic level.
Yes, There are a lot of people who are writing reams of material on this who know very little about it. That's certainly true. So it's kind of really hard to say. I think sensibly hard to say whether regime change in Iran is possible or not, which is why I think it's been sensible to achieve what the Israelis and the Americans want and then back off with a ceasefire.
Well, I think what we found with the Iraq War 2, Jack, is that regime change is while it might be theoretically beneficial, it can cause all sorts of problems. Now, there were certainly issues that the US administration forced on Iraq that were regrettable and led to a massive insurrection and the deaths of many and wounding of many American soldiers and soldiers from around the world. They de-Baathified the place, basically took the people who knew how to run the country out, sent the military all home with their weapons, and thought, oh, this will be fine. So I just think that regime change is probably not. I mean, Trump has called for it, but Rubio and others have said no. Well, that's not really what we're aiming for, and in a sense, it might well be a view that a regime change might throw up something possibly even worse than the current regime. Yeah, you can never really tell. Better the devil you know.
There seems to be a presumption a lot in the Western media that if there's regime change, it'll be the Iranians, rather like the Iranian diaspora, who run the place, and the diaspora are liberal, democratic, as Western as you like, and there are a lot of them in Iran.
Particularly Tehran.
But not a majority of Iran, so they may not be the people who you get in charge if there's regime change.
Yes, I often sort of play this so people understand. Once you move out of a big city like Tehran, you have, the sort of the mullah's version of one nation, if you like. And these people are absolutely they despise America, the great Satan. They are fundamentalist Shia Muslims, and they would be problematic if they were ever given a run at running the country.
And they have to have some say in a new regime. It would be regrettable if they were in charge of it, but even if the liberal Western democratic Iranian diaspora types run the place, they're going to have to take account of the fact that there are a lot of other groups as well.
Exactly right, and this is one of the failings around the Iraq War 2. Yes, it led to Saddam Hussein's being toppled, being ultimately executed, but then there all sorts of forces came together, driven by some real stupidity from the Americans, that led to an absolute bloodbath. Here, I think there is less appetite for that sort of meddling. Certainly, there will be no boots on the ground in Iran, American or Israeli or anywhere. We might just have got to the end of it now, but we'll see. I would expect that there'll be a response. Most people don't realise that southern Iraq is really a satellite of Iran's now. It's essentially under control. This is one of the biggest oil fields in the world. Iran has its own oil interests too, Jack. The Iranian parliament, such as it is, voted to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is a sort of key key area for distributing, I think, between 20 and 25% of the world's oil around the planet, including a lot to China. Doing that, blockading the Strait of Hormuz, would necessarily involve, I would think, further conflict, wouldn't it?
It would, and I don't think they'll do it because they're a major customer of the Chinese, and I don't think the Chinese want to be without oil. So that's a big factor. Well, in any event, I had a look this morning. The oil futures are off 5% overnight.
Yeah. So what's the price of oil? You give me the West Texas crude price. Have you got that handy?
The future quote is for $70.
$70. The fear was 100, and when it gets to 100, it's a horror show for everywhere around the world. Expensive petrol for Australians here. Right now, we're on about $1.70 a litre, and that would probably go to about $2.50, maybe almost $3 a litre. But it seems that that's not happening either, Jack. So that oil futures reflects at least the market's view that the Straits of Hormuz won't be blockaded.
No, that's right. Well, the market doesn't believe that's the case. Can I just say one thing that perhaps the most surprising thing over the last week and a bit has been that for the first time that I can point to, that the White House is actually, that the American administration actually comes out of this looking competent. It was done in secret. They were able to maintain the secrecy. They were able to mislead the Iranians, and there were no leaks. If you compare that to the first Trump administration, which leaked like a colander that had been shot a few times, it's sort of a quite remarkably surprising, at least to me.
And it led to on that occasion, Trump's first administration, it led to a reprise attack at a US base in Iraq, Jack, which led to the wounding of 100 odd soldiers and 100 odd troops there. This time, no such response. And I suspect a lot of this, you're right about the secrecy. No one had any idea until essentially it happened. I also suspect that circumstances are such now that Iran was on its knees even before the Israeli strikes.
Yes,
through the assassinations of senior figures in the regime. I mean, actually, I believe on the weekend Turkey reached out to Ayatollah Khamenei and said, "Let's sit around the table. The US, Israel, yourself." They couldn't get hold of him. He's gone off grid, is the explanation, Jack.
I'm told the joke in Iran is that we don't know where he is, but we're pretty sure that Mossad does.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, Jack. There are a number of there's a large Jewish population in Iran, of course. Now, not that they would be permitted to have access to the top personnel in the regime, but clearly there is intelligence that Mossad has been able to exploit people who are perhaps disappointed with the regime in Iran, and so there are insiders working there. These assassinations prior to the attacks from Israel on Iran were pinpoint, and the leader of Hamas was killed. Some of the worst figures in the Iranian military were killed. Also, some of the tech people, and then when the strikes did occur, it focused on more of the military chiefs and some of those technical people. So they may not have the capacity to build a nuclear weapon anyway now. They might have the gear, but they won't be able to miniaturize it, won't be able to put it together.
There are a lot of people in Iran who would be, broadly speaking, pro-Israel, who would see what the Gulf Arabs have done, for instance, and want the same thing, want to have a rapprochement with Israel and to build a better economy for the region. Again, I don't think they're anywhere near a majority, but there would be plenty. And Mossad are very good at finding allies. They can find them in Lebanon to help them defenestrate Hezbollah, and they can find them almost everywhere except for the Gaza Strip.
Well, that's the point, Jack, that the October 7 Hamas attacks on Israel have, as appalling as they were, have led to essentially the destruction of Hamas, the destruction of Hezbollah, the Iranian regime on its knees, and the collapse of the Assad regime. Is it possible Jack, that peace will break out in the Middle East now?
Look, it's entirely possible. The October 7 increasingly is looking like the biggest strategic miscalculation in a long, long time.
If we date it all back to that, look, I still think we've got some really significant problems in Gaza. I mean, there is starvation going on there. The country's been blockaded. Is now the time. I'm not expecting much from Netanyahu, but really, is now the time for the West to intercede there and at least get Gazans properly fed, properly sheltered, properly looked after medically, those sorts of things.
Yes, and I suspect there will be pressure from various sources to make that happen, from various places to make that happen.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Look,
including from the United States, I would think.
I just want to read a couple of things. Who was the Iraqi? You remember the fellow who was completely deluded? He was their sort of propaganda minister, and
yes, he used to stand there while the bombs were raining down behind him and telling everyone it was going exceptionally well.
American tank battalions coming ever closer, and
comical Ali, they used to call him.
Yeah. Well, Iran's Revolutionary Guard are pretty much saying the same thing. War starts right now. The U.S. military airstrikes totally. They talk about obliteration, but they really just don't have that sort of capacity. I want to just get to now. I mean, there was some criticism from, I guess, what we might call the usual sources, that the Albanese government was slow in making any statement around the Iranian strike, around the US strikes in Iran. Is there a problem with that, really? What's the problem with taking 24 hours to ponder a response, Jack, given that we're not combatants, given that this is half a world away?
Well, the Australian government was pretty much in lockstep with the UK government and most of the EU in its uncertainty as to how to respond. And that's because they weren't in the loop at all. For all of the talk about, we've all got to get together and solve this, this all happened without any involvement from them whatsoever. I think the UK were made aware of it while the planes were in the air, and that's only because they were probably flying over UK airspace. But
there are British troops in that they swing through that Qatari base, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't know what some of our media expects of the government in those circumstances. They are dealing with things as we are. They're watching it on the news. Yes, they're picking up intel. Yes, there is some sort of, there will be some sort of form of sharing. But the fact that it took, I guess, the best part of 24, it might have even been 30 hours by the time the Prime Minister came forward and said he supported that Australia was, endorsed those attacks, believed that a nuclear-armed Iran was dangerous for the world. And I don't think that's saying anything that's particularly controversial. But he copped a bit of criticism for it, and then he copped once that statement was made, he copped a bit of criticism for supporting, from the usual sectors again on the left, for supporting international war crimes, etc., etc.
Yeah. There has been some mild amusement in watching the various reactions around the place. The Greens, as always, are on the podium for amusement.
Well, you're just getting there, Jack. Yes, Greens defence spokesman David Shoebridge. David Shoebridge's got about 12 portfolios, defence being one of them. He has slammed Labor for being complicit in the escalation and violence in the Middle East, calling for Australia to distance itself from the US. He then went on to make some uninvited comments about AUKUS, which is a problem, but let's one step at a time, please. But Shoebridge said, at this moment, being silent when a bully like Donald Trump breaks international law and starts the United States' third war in the region just this century, being silent is complicit in that escalation and violence. This was before Elbow made his statement. Where is the red line the Albanese government has for the escalation and violence? Who was that kind of message appealing to, Jack?
Or his supporters. Well, that's just shoring
Not
up the
many of
vote.
them. We just found out a couple of months ago. Not many of them.
No.
And I think Cosmaris was making a similar sort of comment today that what Australians expect is a clear messaging. But they don't want to see those people who are hanging on to the Stars and Stripes banner and cheering on Donald Trump, nor do they want to support. I mean, the whole idea of supporting the Iranian regime is just anathema to most Australians. So it's that sort of failure from the Greens and others on the right to forge a middle path.
Well, personally, I've found the attempt to forge a middle path by the government, Australian government and UK and most of the European countries almost equally amusing. It's sort of, well, we have to rely on, we have to get back to negotiations, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if the one thing the last week has taught us is sometimes you need something more than negotiations.
Yeah.
As unpleasant as that may be, as unpleasant a lesson to learn as that may be.
Well, these are tactical strikes, Jack. So there are no innocents being killed here. So no one can sort of scream
well,
about
not many,
war crimes. Well, the bloke on the gate, the bloke on the gate at one of the nuclear facilities. These are all people who are complicit. They're workers there, so forth. So if some of them were killed or wounded, I don't have a real problem with that. The LNP, Jack, Susan Ley, again, they came out early, and I just got to say, Jack, from a tactical point of view, from a strategic point of view as a politician, and you see this event occur, a surprise, it takes the world by surprise. Perhaps the best political or strategic thing to do is just sit back for about 24 hours and check out the environment, check out the landscape, and then make a statement. But Susan Ley was out of the blocks early. She said the world can never accept a nuclear-armed Iranian regime. Okay. And then she said Iran seeks to destroy Australia's allies and the government should not allow the Iranian regime the capacity to enact its objectives of destruction of the United States. It was made clear by the International Atomic and Energy Agency, which is a UN agency, on 12 June that Iran was in breach of its non-proliferation treaty obligations after stockpiling more than 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium at Fordow, the last step in, that's the underground facility, the last step in enrichment towards a nuclear weapon. The world can never accept a nuclear Iranian regime. Look, not bad, but nothing in it. I mean, she's just sort of saying, what the rest of the world is kind of really thinking. But there was criticism, and she directed it. She said that the Deputy Prime Minister should not be a guest at that forthcoming NATO meeting. That Albo should get along, and so Albo took his time, and he just said that the security situation is highly volatile. We note the US President's statement that now is the time for peace. The security situation in the region is highly volatile. We continue to call for de-escalation, dialogue and diplomacy, which is probably now where it's headed, Jack. We don't know. There are bound. I mean, look, you rattle the cage in the Middle East, you're never quite sure what's going to happen.
No, that's true. Let's say this about Albanese and Wong. There's nothing wrong with the statement they made at all, really. Not terribly strong, but that's okay. You don't know what's going to happen. I've never seen a Prime Minister and a foreign minister look less happy about having to make a statement than they did when they were making it. They were like the old Labor Party joke about sometimes you've got to eat the shit sandwich and say, and it's good that it's fresh,
Yeah, it'd be horrible if it was stale.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, of course. Look, Australia has really, the Australian government, the Albanese government, has to deal with the Trump government. We are left in a sort of foreign policy or military and strategic vacuum right now with the uncertainty around AUKUS. We understand that we're a junior partner in this, but the one who basically, or the two that instigated it, Boris Johnson and Scott Morrison, they're gone, and it seems that perhaps no one's explained AUKUS to Donald Trump, or if they have, they haven't explained it very well, and he's not all that happy about it. And so all of our, as we discussed last week, all of our strategic responses are enmeshed with the Trump government. Maybe it is time we start, looking at our own strategic and military needs, Jack.
Well, I think Australia's been slow to catch up with that. Yeah, that the
glacial.
Yeah, that the other NATO countries, apart from the US, in Europe, and generally countries are saying, well, look, yes, we do understand that we've got to look after our own strategic interests to an extent, and we've got to contribute. And Australia seems to think it can get away with not doing that, and I think that's not sustainable.
No, I don't think it is. I think we really need to have a big rethink. I mean, the sorts of things that we need to defend ourselves are, and we're not talking about any particular foe, but the sorts of things we need to, and we don't have, mid-range ballistic missiles, submarines, with the capacity to launch mid-range ballistic missiles. I mean, we've got a missile strike zone, Jack, which has just reached East Timor, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot that we would ever need to do there, but that's as far as our missiles go, from the absolute tip of the Australian mainland.
Yeah, well, you that Jose Ramasorda, and he's a worry.
What are we doing here? And it means you're going to have to invest more in your military. It does mean that. We can't be lax about these things.
But it also means you've got to spend it with some effect, not just whack a number.
We've been spending money on defence acquisitions, just complete duds. I mean, just look at the French submarine deal. We've had to pay $6 billion for nothing. Nothing.
Really, as a starting point, the defence officials should go and visit places like Israel, Singapore, the places who have to do a fair bit with not much, without unlimited funds. Go to Poland and talk to what they're doing about fixing their problem, and learn some things. Because at the moment, whacking another 5% on the defence budget would just mean to be wasted.
It is rocket science, but it's not all that complicated. You do need the ability to strike deep in a foe's own territory and give them a bloody nose if they come at you. And that acts as a deterrent. I mean, yes, there needs to be.
Which is precisely what Singapore and Israel can do.
But just simply saying, well, we've got a base full of US Marines up in Darwin is probably not going to be enough to protect your country. It's probably just going to be enough to protect that base. All right, responses to the attacks. Sophie McNeil, who is, I think she's a member of the New South Wales Upper House, Jack, is that right?
I think she is. She's a former journalist.
Let me have a quick look. Yeah, member of the Legislative Council in Bunbury. I was born in Bunbury. She's born in Bunbury. Anyway, Legislative Council. That's New South Wales. She said she's very horrified, Jack, by it all. She's a bit traumatised, to be honest. I just can't believe that the Australian Labor Australian government, with a 50-seat majority, some of those came from you, wants to align us even more with the broken, corrupt, unhinged and extremely dangerous Trump US government. I'm gobsmacked. I'm terrified. I just can't believe it. Hashtag Ozpol. That's what I mean. It's a very good argument to be made. Just hold your fire, particularly on social media. If you're a politician or a journalist or a commentator, just hold your fire for 24 hours. Get a better view of the landscape before you start making silly comments like that. Australia must get out of AUKUS. Oh, this is Bernard Keane. I don't know why we're bothering with him, Jack, but we'll give him a go. In the interests of something or other. Australia must get out of AUKUS. Well, we're talking about that. It's a sensible conversation to have. We must end our alliance with the rogue USA, as it is increasingly hell-bent on undermining international law and global human rights norms. By remaining, we are complicit in this madness. Australia needs an independent foreign policy now. I imagine there were just thousands of shares there, Jack, and likes and what have you. Albanese and so now we get to the Greg Barnes bit, and well, perhaps
we've done with that.
We don't need to spend any more time with Greg Barnes. That may not have been Bernard Keane. I think Bernard Keane actually said Albanese and Labor's village idiot, Richard Marles, he just called him Marles, need to explain quickly what role, if any, Australia played in the illegal US attack on Iran and what they knew about it ahead of time. And then in parentheses, and why we continue to ally ourselves to the key source of global chaos and uncertainty. Jack, what he was referring to there was Pine Gap, presumably.
Yeah.
Basically a communications satellite network.
And the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister were questioned about that, and of course they can't say a word.
Yeah.
And nor should they.
We want to be open. Well, Albo was talking about being open and accountable and all this sort of stuff. And said, "Oh, what about Pine Gap?" And he went, "Well, we're open, but we're not that bloody open."
Well, I would be horrified if an Australian government were actually telling everyone what's happening in places like that.
Yeah. All right. Look.
What about the people with the we should be in the flag business, the people who were carrying Palestinian flags a month ago, then in the US they started carrying Mexican flags, and now they're carrying Iranian flags. And my personal highlight was the march in Melbourne, not in Melbourne, but in London, where they were carrying giant photos of the Ayatollah with the script written on top of it saying, "Be on the right side of history."
Oh, yeah, it's an interesting take. I mean, I think if you decide you're going to bunk in with one of the world's worst regimes, just appalling treatment of their citizenry, women in particular. I think I mentioned
gays.
Oh, yeah. Forget about there's no Rainbow Coalition in Iran.
Yeah, they hang them off cranes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And, you fail to wear the hijab as a woman in Tehran. I mean, and that happens a lot. But on the books, there's after the uprising 2 years ago, there's now a 15-year jail sentence. And I suspect the jails wouldn't pass muster in Australian corrective services terms. Yeah, so if you decide you're going to stump into this just because you can't stand Donald Trump, I don't like Donald Trump much either. But when you look at this, you got to say, listen, really the best thing that can happen here is that they are brought to the table, heads bowed, to negotiate a future where they will not have a nuclear capacity.
Anyway, we should be in the flag business, really, because someone's knocking out these flags quickly and efficiently. I guess the good thing is the last three flags have all had much the same colours, so you can keep your material.
Yeah, you're not spending too much in dyes. But if you are running around with an Iranian flag, I mean, I haven't seen any Iranians. There wouldn't be any Iranians in Australia who are sympathetic towards that regime.
No, because almost all of the Iranian diaspora, which is quite large, are people who are not in Iran because of the regime.
Quick reminder, my very good friend Mark Colvin in Tehran during the Islamic Revolution when Khomeini came into power, he and other journalists taken out on buses to a quarry where there was just a sea of dead bodies that had been executed by the new regime. using, by the way, the Shah Secret Police. The Shah Secret Police sort of just changed its name. Anyway, and they were all dragged out of the buses and thought, oh, here's our turn. And they were told, film this, tell the story, this is who we are. And they haven't really let us down ever since.
What about in the US and the Congress? There were, I think Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez thought that the raids were grounds for another impeachment of Donald Trump. And the rest of them all been running around saying it's unconstitutional because he didn't seek congressional approval. Where's that going to go?
Let's have a talk about that, because I remember in my time Bill Clinton launching Tomahawk cruise missile strikes all over the place. Obama launched drone strikes and cruise missile strikes on terrorist events. And basically, Somalia was an absolute hellhole, and now it's not, because of the strategic assassinations and destruction that was ran upon the terrorist group there, who are still around but much, much debased. And
it hasn't quite become a holiday destination yet, but it is much better. Yeah,
lovely beaches, but yes, it is a whole. Well, it was an absolute catastrophe as a failed state. So what I'm saying is that these things, including Trump, launched a strike into Iran in his first term. So clearly, congressional approval is not required for those things, although congressmen and women might jump up and down about that.
Do you know the last time that it's a Section 8, whatever it's called, the last time a US president got approval from Congress?
Oh, I'm going to say 1941, December.
42, actually, but yeah.
42, sorry, yes, of course.
It hasn't been done since. So there you go. So this is just playing to their supporters. What are we going to do? We'll kick up a stink and say he should have gotten congressional approval.
Yeah, and it isn't that. I mean, so what would be? Yeah, so the strike was in 41. Sorry. And congressional approval was provided probably a month later, but of course, FDR's message to the American people told them they were in a state of war with Japan. Basically on the evening of
before he had congressional approval, I think. But yeah, so even that,
Yeah. So let me just get back to my notes, Jack. Sorry. Czech Prime Minister Peter Fiala issued one of the most positive statements about America's decision to get involved. The right-wing politician described Trump's decision to enter the war as an understandable effort to prevent Tehran from developing nuclear weapons. The US military action, which has supported Israel's efforts, will hopefully finally bring the Iranian regime to a negotiating position that would lead to a calming of the situation in the Middle East. Viktor Orban, I guess we could say, is a little bit more predictable. But over in the UN, Jack, and Antonio, the Secretary General there, Antonio Guterres, said that the US attack on Iran is a dangerous escalation in a region already on the edge and a direct threat to international peace and security. He warned that the conflict could rapidly get out of control and result in catastrophic consequences. UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said that Tehran's nuclear program is a grave threat to international security and that the country cannot be allowed to develop a new nuclear weapon. The US has taken action to alleviate that threat. That tells me Sir Keir Starmer is probably a little bit more in the loop than we thought, Jack.
He at least knew it was happening as it was happening. The UN, of course, they're like the Australian Greens. They jump in too quickly.
Well, the United Nations, we could spend episodes and episodes on the United Nations. The United Nations is a reflection on the ugly politics around the world. That's what it is. So, when the Secretary General gets up and speaks, he's also speaking to appalling states like Iran, like Iraq, like some of the stands and parts of the Middle East where they sit on human rights committees, Jack, and tell everyone else how appalling the West is. So we've dealt with the constitutionality there, Jack. We might just look at some of the American principles. Clinton said, this is Bill Clinton, not Hillary, Mr. Netanyahu has long wanted to fight Iran because that way he can stay in office forever and ever. There's a bit to be said about that. But I think we should be trying to diffuse it, and I hope President Trump will do that. I hope anybody there will do that. We've got to convince our friends in the Middle East that we'll stand with them and try to protect them. Sensible enough, Jack? Pelosi said, tonight the president ignored the Constitution by unilaterally engaging our military without congressional authorization. I've got some quotes from Nancy Pelosi going back a few years, Jack, which are completely different to the position she held.
That's the pesky
thing. You don't want to get into that.
That's the pesky thing about the internet, isn't it? That they can quickly go back and find clips of you saying the exact opposite. Meanwhile, the Pakistanis think that Trump should get a Nobel Peace Prize.
The Pakistanis do. I thought they were going to lob a nuke someone's way if nuclear weapons were used on Iran.
No. They say that he should get a Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of his decisive diplomatic intervention and pivotal leadership during the recent Indo-Pakistan crisis.
Probably not going to win one for that. Just a feeling I've got. Bono's probably more likely. He's perennially nominated. But
the Indians, I might add, don't agree at all.
I'm sure they don't.
But then they don't agree about much. But this is a test for you. The last winner of the Nobel Peace Prize was Nihan Hidianko, Hidankyo. Do you know anything about it?
No, go ahead.
Don't know who he is?
No,
I certainly didn't know who he is. And in fact, it's not a he. It's an organisation from Japan devoted to looking after any survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I ran through a list of the last 20 Nobel Peace Prize winners, didn't know who any of them were. Even the ones I did know about didn't really care. It's become a complete joke. But perhaps make it.
Mate, it's not become a complete joke. When Henry Kissinger wins a Nobel Prize, that's time to pack it up and go home.
Yeah,
it's terrific that you invented dynamite, but this joke's gone on long enough.
Yeah.
I am looking, by the way, at the language of spoken ethnicity of Iran, and all at Raf Epstein on the Insiders. I think I was on the Insiders too, but I didn't get to watch it. I was just on doing Talking Pics. I know because I filmed it on Thursday.
Are you like one of that British politician who said television's for going on, not for watching?
That's probably about right. Yeah, I didn't manage to watch it, but one of my mates in Hong Kong told me he saw me. And so Raf Epstein has basically just done a bit of a Google search, pulled up the Wikipedia page, and then gone, how come you don't know these things?
Yeah.
Which is it's kind of reasonable. But
he was making a fair point that there are a lot of people who are pretty sure they know everything about a country without knowing anything at all.
All right. Well, there are 2% Turkish, 14% Azerbaijani, 9% Kurdish, 2% Arabic, 2% Balochi. I'm not even sure how many Persians are in that lot, Jack.
About 70%, I think, is my memory.
No, 56 points. Well, the Persian is spoken in Iran by 56.6% of the population, and it might be higher. The ethnic population might be higher than that. Yeah, so I'm not sure about all of that, but yeah, if you get a chance to have a bit of a Google search before you jump on. Now, Jack, just one thing that you will not see on your script there. Judge's remarks in the mushroom poisoning trial. We won't say too much about it because the jury is set to consider a verdict over the next day or so. In fact, I think, yes, Justice Christopher Beale has addressed the jury today, and I believe his remarks will go for another day. and then the jury will consider their verdict, Jack, and that will be one that has the world's media hanging around out the front of little marble courtroom, Jack.
Yeah, your pal Duncan McNabb was down there covering it for a while. Is Chris Beale? Is Chris Beale the judge? Is he? He's a
Justice
contemporary of mine from law school.
Oh, right. Well, there you go. He has addressed the jury today, and he's told them they must not let feelings of prejudice or sympathy impact decision making. It would be hellishly difficult for a jury, on my sporadic reading of the conduct of the trial. I'll just ask you one question, Jack. It's not usual for the accused to give evidence under oath, but she did.
Not common, no.
All right. Well, we will,
and we of course have no idea why that happened. Whether it was on advice, against advice, or whatever. No
Indeed.
idea.
Yeah, we don't know. We're not going to speculate. A jury has been impanelled, and they'll be considering their verdict over the next few days, possibly weeks. I do note, Jack, that Kyle and Jackie O were in a spot of bother over discussions they had on radio about the trial, and I believe that has now been referred to the Office of Public Prosecutions in Victoria, Jack.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder why people want to jump in and make comments about stuff like that.
Well, you do understand who we're talking about now. We're talking about Kyle Sandilands and Jackie, whatever her name is, and they have entered into the Melbourne market with very little fanfare, Jack. In fact, I reckon you can count their listeners on the fingers of one hand. But what I understand is
they do breakfast radio,
a contempt prosecution quite likely.
Yeah, they do breakfast radio, don't they?
Yeah, and huge in Sydney. They continue to dominate the FM ratings, but they've gone down to Melbourne, and it's a completely different market. And they've just tried to do their old things about how funny anal sex is and all this kind of stuff that somehow everyone in Western Sydney thinks is funny, or not everyone, but a fair chunk of it do. But down in Melbourne, they've gone, ugh. Well, it's been an utter failure.
I think Melbourne still dominated Melbourne Breakfast Radio. My old pal Ross Patterson-Campbell still dominates.
I think they do. I haven't seen ratings from Melbourne for a while, but I think 3AW is the sort of 2GB of Sydney, of Melbourne, I should say.
But a bit different to 2GB.
Oh, not a lot. You listen to Jack Elliott's young bloke, mate?
Oh, he's a Carlton man. Can't blame me for that.
I want him out of the club. I reckon he's part of the problem.
All right. We'll get to that. Yeah.
We must move on very, very quickly. Tasmanian election. They will go to the people on the 19th of July to elect all 35 members of the House of Assembly. I am told by my Tasmanian sources that Labor opposition leader Dean Winter probably pushed it too far and has probably blotted his copybook there, Jack. And it may well be that Rockcliffe is returned with something approaching a workable majority.
Yeah, let's move on to sport. It's been too heavy today.
We are skipping through a lot, Jack. Have you watched any of the tests at Leeds at Headingley, Jack?
I've watched the first session a few days, and a cracking test match. And from an Ashes perspective, my takeaway would be not so sure about England's bowling, but their batting's very, very good. I think at the moment on the world rankings, the two best batsmen are English, Joe Root and Harry Brook. So.
Well, Harry Brook got out for 99, Jack, and look, he has had a bit of a knock on him that he gets out when he shouldn't. But the ball he got from the one and only Jasprit Bumrah, well, you just put the bat under your arm and wander off.
Well, he was out for he trudged off disconsolately on the night before for 0, because Bumrah, the only bowler on the park who was able to to menace a batsman, got one up near his throat, and he's dollied it up to square leg and he's or to mid wicket, and he's trudging off thinking, oh well, that's me for a duck. And the umpires upstairs have checked and it was a no ball. So he got another 99 after that.
Root didn't get many. Look, the star of this has been the Indian wicketkeeper, and what an amazing comeback he's had from a terrible car accident. Jack.
Centuries in both innings. He's now got 4 centuries in England. He's the first visiting keeper ever to get 4 centuries in England, I think.
Yeah, there is an argument. That he might have just gone past. Adam Gilchrist as a wicketkeeper batsman. And of course, we are talking about the wonderful, and he's so fun to watch, Rishabh Pant.
Yeah, it's always entertaining. You never quite know what he's going to do next.
Oh,
he fall over, or
there was a shout. The Stokes when it were referred a shout. He'd sort of fallen over trying to play a lap over and got hit in front, but he'd knocked the ball onto his pads, and they wasted the review. Terrific cricket. England.
I don't know whether you saw the start of his innings in the first dig. But he came in and Stokes was bowling really well. So the second ball, he's just gone whack, put it straight back over Stokes' head. And Stokes is just laughing,
Stokes just laughed at him. So they need England needs 371. This probably will get to our listeners after the result is achieved. So England need to make 350 on the 5th day, and the wicket is starting to turn, Jack. So
fifth day wickets are always hard. I just say Bummer
it started turning quite a bit. I mean, England spinners, not a great. Michelle Bashir's not a great spinner as yet, but Ravindra Jadeja is and should have a significant impact on the game, as will Jasprit Bumrah.
Well, Bumrah's just gone over the 200 wickets. Someone sent me on Facebook a list of the top 10 or so batsmen, bowlers who've taken over 200 wickets and their averages, and he's at the top of the list.
He is an all-time great. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, 19 or so. Malcolm Marshall, who I think is the best bowler best fast bowler I ever saw.
Yeah,
is
very
next.
Similar types.
Is next, but and again an unusual action and all that kind of stuff. But Bumrah's a full run ahead of him on the averages.
He must be so hard to face. And look, he was interviewed. I don't know if you saw it, but he was interviewed by Michael Atherton and a couple of others. And he's such a humble fellow, such a lovely, lovely man. I don't think he gets too aggro on the field, but certainly he wants to knock batsmen out, get rid of them, knock them over and what have you. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just seems like a wonderful fellow. And, of course, came from nothing.
He was discovered bowling in the street.
Mm. And if you look at, they actually went through his release motion, and they talk about releasing the ball at the top of the perpendicular, so at the very highest point. But his is another probably 10 or 20 degrees below that as he gets rid of the ball. So, for a batsman point of view, it must be so hard to pick it up. And of course, he's a genuine swing bowler too. Mm. So he's moving the ball in the air. It's just nightmare for batsmen. Who wins, Jack? Very quickly.
Look, I think the Indians will win this one.
I think
but there's 4 to go, and it'll be a cracking series, I think.
Yeah, cracking series. AFL,
and good news for Australia for the summer coming up, because England are really going to be formidable. I think their bowling needs some work, but their batting is very good.
Well, Wood is missing, and I believe he won't be back until I think late in the series for India.
Yeah.
Wood will change things. Jofra Archer, I presume, would be picked if fit. They do lack pace, and And if you're looking to get wickets out through seam in Australia, you're really going to struggle, particularly if you're bowling 120, 25 kilometres an hour.
Well, there's one of the blokes yesterday was bowling 140 pretty consistently, and he's tall. He could make a go of it.
He cleaned up the Indian tail pretty quickly.
Cass, isn't it?
Yeah, Cass, and he did. Yeah, he looks okay. Wokes known for 103. Just it was actually this is the first dig. Sorry, Wokes, he's got 1 for 150 for match figures. Cass took 3. Tongue looked all right too, but I just wonder in Australian conditions how they would get on. Over to the AFL, Jack. The big issue there, or the big thing that is talked about, is Carlton, and it seems to be a complete media thing. Talking about sacking the coach and all that sort of stuff. And I just can't see, any reason why Carlton would want to do that. Having said that, they've got a bit of form. But we had to endure a fairly lacklustre.
You reckon someone might be watching Colo's car pull up out the front window?
No, it's not Colo anymore. It's Graham right now, ex-Collingwood player and an administrator. Look, I can't see any value in any of that. There are issues around the Blues. I think in the end, if you're looking at skill level, they're just not good enough. It's as simple as that. I've never seen a side, and I watch a lot of AFL footy, I've never seen a side, they might get that clearance, that centre clearance, and they'll have someone running at the goals, and they will almost always butcher the ball at that point.
Yeah, well, I watched just a few little clips from, 2 or 3 of the 450 talk shows on AFL that are currently running in Melbourne, and they're all divvying up the Carlton list. They're working out where they're going to go. And
look, I don't know. I mean, they are heavy on the salary cap with players like Curnow, Mackay, Jacob Wiedering. And then there are players like McGovern and Williams who perhaps are on big salaries but aren't performing as well as they might. He kicked 4 goals on the weekend, Mitch McGovern, so didn't do too badly, been moved forward. I look at someone like Charlie Curnow and think, well, what's going on there? I mean, one of the guns in the competition, but you've had a very, very quiet year this year. Yeah, so there may well be a bit of trading. The problem is, most of the draft experts consider this draft to be not sparkling. There is Peter Dean's son will be prominent in that draft, Jack, and there's a father and son, a prospect there for Carlton. Also, Andrew Walker's son, Cody, looks to be a very, very good player. So those guys might come along. We've got a couple of Camper Reales. Carlton, whatever you do, please don't sack the coach. It's just, we just can't do this anymore. Michael Voss is the most successful coach of Carlton for the last 15 years, by the way, with a 55% win rate. Everyone else, I think Brett Ratton just got 50, and everybody else is in the negative. So, let's not bother with that too much.
Well, there's a lesson here. It's hardly ever just the senior coach, and Graham Wright, I think's very astute. And you look at, say, the Richmond example, when they did the review there when Hardwick was in danger of getting the sack, and they decided to keep him in place and change everything else around him and change the approach.
They changed some key personnel in the footy department and then 3 flags in 4 years. So, there's a lot to be said for that. And I don't think there's a disconnect between the players. I did see Vossi give the midfield a bit of a spray, and it was one of those. It was one of those games where I've been watching 3 or 4 of the younger players who, in their first years, all had bad games, and that's going to happen with young players. But there's some issues there around some of the senior players. They're just not having the sort of impact that they should be. All right, NRL, Origin, Jack, you would have seen that in the tally in a bar somewhere in Hong Kong.
I watched the first half.
Last week.
Yeah, watched the first half in a bar.
What's the lesson there? I mean, I was talking, I was listening to all the commentary before the game. They go, well, there's really no way Queensland can win this. How many times do we have to be showing this? And of course, it came on the back of some pretty rough commentary on Triple M radio in Sydney with Aaron Woods, former Blue prop, who referred to Queensland coach as what was the term he used? A grub.
A bit of a grub.
Called Billy Slater a grub. And then, of course, Kevin Munster was interviewed after the game that Queensland won reasonably convincingly. They were certainly dominated the night. And said, well, you're going to have a crack at our coach. We love him, so we're going to play for him. And so they got the job done. And Channel 9 would have breathed a huge sigh of relief that it will go into a decider, not a dead rubber.
Yeah, I wondered about the smartness of attacking Billy. Billy's a bit of a. It's like shooting Bambi, really. I mean, he's a very popular.
He referred to an incident where Billy did kick a bloke on the field. It was a kick backwards, if you know what I mean. So hit him with the sole of his shoes, and it wasn't probably Billy's most glorious time on the field, but. Yeah, I mean, Bill.
This is rugby league we're talking.
Yeah,
about.
and then Bill replied. I thought he spoke really well, and then he summoned up the Paul Green, of course, who suffered from CTE and significant brain damage from CTE, and summoned him as a sort of person that might have ended his life because of some of the pressure that was put on him by media, and of course that wasn't right, but. Billy did reach out to Paul Green's wife. The Australia got the scoop there because we've been studying the CTE issue, been following the CTE issue quite closely. And Green's wife admired Billy Slater for ringing up and apologising and said we had a fair way to go with CTE and acknowledging its impact. Yeah. But the lesson for me is, if you're a New South Wales barrier, please don't write off Queensland. That is when they win. All right, Jack, that should just about take us out. Yep. I thought you might have
a lot going on in the world.
There's a fair bit going on, so we have concentrated a fair bit on an rapidly unfolding set of circumstances in the world. I'm just looking at the Age headline. Jack, Trump declares ceasefire, which is an interesting thing. But look, we'll be back with you next week. You'll take us right to the 1st of July when we do that, and we'll get this episode out to you very, very quickly. Please drop us a line. You know how to get hold of us. Please drop us a line if you have any comments, anything you wish us to explore, or any critiques, comments, criticisms, whatever. Let us know. And that takes us out. Thank you for your thoughts today, Jack. That takes us out of episode 118, and we'll be back next week with 119. See you, folks.
Cheers.